Hello, and welcome to another engaging episode of Stan the History Man. And I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Sandler. And today I want to talk about two of the worst rogues in human history, certainly in modern history. That is Hitler and Stalin, and the comparisons and the differences between the two of them. And we can start at the beginning with how they took power. You see, Stalin basically shot his way into the Bolshevik Party, shot his way into power, and then Stalin shot, forced, or whatever, purged his way into power in the Bolshevik or Communist Party, which is the way the communists always took over. As a matter of fact, there was no case that I know of where the communists ever came to power by an election. They represent the people and everything, but they never seem to get the people's votes. I understand in the Indian state of Kerala, sometime in the 1950s, there was a communist uh, government that came in power legally, but I'm not sure about that. It's rather obscure. At any rate, um, cut the top of my head off here. Uh, Hitler, on the other hand, he did have his comic opera beer hall putsch in Munich in November 1923. He actually led an armed parade, as it were, of armed Nazis, and they thought they were going to take over the Bavarian government starting in Munich. But they ran against a collection of police, of gendarmerie, and troops were told to disperse, and they did. And the troops and gendarmerie fired on them, and 15 Nazis were killed. The Germans are a law-abiding people, so they're breaking the law. You cannot have a coup d'état or a putsch, as the Germans call it, in Germany without having to pay the prices. So Hitler, as you well-known story, nothing unusual here, was injured. He was actually injured in the shooting. A comrade who was killed had gripped his arm and fell down, and that kind of wrenched Hitler's arm out of the socket for a while. Nothing really serious, and he was imprisoned for treason, as it were, and spent 5 years in Landsberg prison in rather comfortable circumstances. The law was pretty much on Hitler's side. And then while he was doing this, he wrote Mein Kampf. But the point I'm making here is he tried to shoot his way into power, if you will, like Stalin, and it didn't work. So then in 1933, when Germany was in a real mess again with terrible see, on the first go around in 1923, it was inflation, hyperinflation, inflation worse than any third world country had, even like it was 1,000,000 marks to the dollar, something like that. Then 1933 was just the opposite, depression. Nobody had any money, cheap or good money. And the depression, of course, was the worldwide depression. And that the Nazi Party increasing power. And then in January 1933, he was the Hindenburg, the prime minister, the president of Germany, called him to become prime minister. That's the way it works in the parliamentary system. Now, it was a coalition. The Nazis did not win the election. They won a plurality. That is, they won more than any other single party, which like the Social Democrats, the Communists, the Peasants' Party, that type of thing. A whole multitude of parties in there. And he had to stitch together a coalition, which he did. And that was legal. And then Hindenburg called on him to form a government, which he did. It's interesting, though, a lot of communists, he's a tool of big business. We know that. Well, he was to begin with, or he got big business support. But after a while, nobody was Hitler's tool. He could string these people up with piano wire if he chose to. The Marxist interpretation, as usual, was wrong here. He had a lot of support from business right throughout the Depression into the war itself, of course. Krupp and Siemens and Schuker. But nonetheless, he told them what to do. He gave them the contracts, and which kept them happy. But the point is that it was legal. He came into power legally. Another thing about the early lives of Hitler and Stalin was married twice. And his first wife was a real love match. He really loved her, but she died of natural causes. And as he was by her open grave, he said, and this has been authenticated by some of the other comrades who were there, that with the burial of this, or the death of this beloved woman, I have lost all human feelings. Words to that effect, all human sentiments, that type of thing. I've lost them all. And they say that, he sort of kept his word there. He really didn't have an awful lot of human sentiments. Now, Hitler was never married. He had two girlfriends, both of whom committed suicide. His first was Gili Raubal. She was his niece, and there was some opposition, going with his niece, the uncle and niece. And he was very demanding on her, surprisingly enough. And if she even looked at another guy, he would get all worked up and so on. Eventually, she shot herself. And Hitler took that pretty badly. He really loved Gili. And then he, much later, took up with Eva Braun, whom we all know. And she was his girlfriend throughout the rest of the 1930s and through the war years and right to the end. And she committed suicide too. Well, I mean, she had to. All the Nazi bigwigs around her were committing suicide as well. But she was kind of an airhead, and not in the sense that she wanted to. If Germany won the war, she wanted to go to Hollywood and star in Hollywood movies, and she loved Robert Taylor. He was her favorite American actor, kind of to Hitler's disgust, who didn't have much use for the United States, Hollywood or otherwise. But that's kind of interesting. Hitler never did marry him. When he was asked him, I said, "My heart belongs to Germany, and so I can't give it over to any woman." The women loved Hitler. He was really, you look at a film of a newsreel film of the cheering crowds as he goes by in his Mercedes convertible. The women are just ecstatic. They just loved the Fuhrer. He had saved Germany, which brings me to another point, a big point, and that is that, and I kind of hate to say it, but Hitler delivered the goods. Hitler said, if y'all elect me, I will wipe out the shame of Versailles, and I will bring back prosperity. And he did that. Versailles, he made all kinds of movements, like we instituted conscription and started an air force and started a navy and started armored forces. All that was against the Treaty of Versailles. He did it anyway. And all the British and the French, the European powers said, well, don't do it too fast, maybe. He did it. All right. And right up to the final horrible thing in which they gave him Versailles or Czechoslovakia, which was created by Versailles. And he took a slice of the Sudetenland, which, well, there are Germans living there, so I should come back to Germany. Okay. And I promise no more. I don't want any more Eastern subhumans in my country. He took the rest of Czechoslovakia. And it's again the Western powers. Well, after he took the rest of Czechoslovakia, then they said, "Hey, you shouldn't do this. Now, this we're getting serious now. Okay, knock it off." And then they gave that guarantee to Poland. Isn't it interesting? They guaranteed. They sold Czechoslovakia down the river. Excuse me. Here's a country, democratic, one of the only democratic countries in Eastern Europe. It was highly developed. In fact, the Czechs made their own tanks. The Skoda works. Okay. So here was industrialized, just the kind of country that, we'd like to have on the Allied side. They sold them down the river. Now, Poland, fine country, fine people, fine culture, but it was a dictatorship, strongly anti-Semitic, not much of an industrial base. And that's the one the Allies said we're going to go to war for. So there you go. At any rate, Hitler delivered the goods with Versailles. They're going to wipe out Versailles. And then the second thing is we're going to bring back prosperity. No more depression, no more inflation. And so with vast rearmament orders, all this stuff that he did, sticking his nose out at the Versailles Treaty, well, that was done with military power. That's what other countries represent. So now he's saying, I've got this Air Force, I got these tanks, and all this stuff. And now I'm going to do as I please. And they're doing this. Of course, this meant heavy industrial armaments. So that kept the big business guys happy. Okay, they got these fat contracts. A lot of corruption in here too. All kinds of party bosses running around and getting payoffs, and they increased enormously the civil service. It's interesting. The Nazis emphasized the peasant, the Bauer, and the workman, and that's the real foundation of America. They hired millions, literally millions. They doubled the size of the civil service. All right, people whom Hitler would denounce as pen pushers. People just never see the light of day. They're in their cubicles working away. That's what they hired. Well, no one ever said the Nazis were consistent. I mean, here you go, National Socialists. On the one hand, it's nationalism, Deutschland über alles, but then socialism, the National Socialist Workers' Party. But at any rate, Germany prospered during the 1930s, and although there's not a little known fact of history about the Nazis, very little known. I've only seen it mentioned maybe once or twice, maybe experts in the National Socialist period or whatever. They actually they had a higher per capita income under Weimar, under the derided Weimar Republic, than under the Nazis. Excuse me. Well, now, because the Nazis, all this harm, it costs money. Okay, but not only that, they're always begging for money. There was the Winter Health Program. There was the Soldiers Comfort Program. Everywhere you'd go, there'd be some kid with a tin pot wanting, a couple of marks from you. That really started to mount up after a while. In fact, they said, "Well, that's good. We want to cut excess spending. We want to live very, very simply." And one of the things they had was an ein Tot dinner, a one pot dinner, and that meant that the family would gather around. German families, of course, they encouraged that, would gather around a pot and have probably some kind of a stew and bread, and the money they saved on that pot would then go to the government, to the Winter Health Program or the Soldier Health Program, something like that. So even allowing the fact that the per capita income was lower, certainly there was no more unemployment. I mean, everybody went to work. Either they worked in the defense plant or in joined the military. And in fact, later in the 30s, they were actually putting actual pressure on an unmarried woman. Well, what's she doing? She, put her to work in a factory somewhere, and the unmarried men as well. So, but it was, and so by Hitler delivering the goods, he had a lot of support from the German people. And when in the early part of the war, when he started winning all over the place, well, then he had a lot of support, especially after the fall of France. Another big difference between the two would be in their ideology. With the Nazis, it was the Aryan, the pure Aryan, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, we might call them today, descended from the Vikings and the tribes of Northern Europe, and the pure blood of that, and the blood has been harmed by inferior peoples from the other side. So you aren't getting an awful lot of converts to Nazism outside of Germany. Oh, there were some Nazis in Holland, and some actually fought for the Germans in World War II. The Norwegians, who can say, "Well, we're all Aryans," and the Nazis say, "Well, you're all Aryans too." Um, but it wouldn't have much of an appeal. In fact, Hitler himself said Nazism is not for anyone who's not German. All right. So in Germany itself, if you kept your mouth shut and did what you're told, paid your taxes, went to work on time, that sort of thing, you probably wouldn't get into trouble. If you made an incautious remark like, "Oh, this, I'm afraid we're going to go to war," you might wind up in a local police station getting beaten around, or maybe even a concentration camp. That's true. But for the most part, those Germans who weren't Jewish, weren't Jehovah's Witnesses, weren't homosexuals, um, let's see, what else would they have? Basically, those were the people who wound up in concentration camps. And they usually got out again later on, but probably walking with a limp. It was a horrible experience, but these weren't death camps. Nonetheless, as I say, if you kept your mouth shut and did what you were told, you would probably survive in Nazi Germany. I say, so long as you were an Aryan. The Aryans were this mythical these mythical tribes that lived up somewhere in the north somewhere, and Goebbels was always trying to trace, or Himmler rather, trying to trace the racial backgrounds of where they came from, and try to trace the Aryans, which didn't exist anyway. Now, with the communists was almost entirely different. They want to change you, the new Soviet man, no longer bound by selfishness under capitalism, trying to make money, that sort of thing. Because we have the new paradise with the new Soviet man, and for a while, right in the early days of communism, the so-called war communism, they abolished money. And they say, well, you want to take a train ride? Go ahead and hop on the train and go where you want to go. It's only fair, isn't it? Yeah, but then they had to have the coal miners had to work to produce the coal to power the locomotives to pull the train. So after a while, even the commissars began to realize that that was extreme. But the goal, the aim really was the new socialist man. They want to remake your mind. Kind of scary. And so if you just muttered something, you didn't like the system, you could wind up being shot or being sent to Siberia, which often would be a death sentence. They want to change everything. The art, see, the art, for example, is socialist realism. We want to have these muscle-bound workers toiling out in the fields or in the coal mines, working for the glorious Soviet motherland. So it was a whole new. They want to change everything. They even, for a while, want to change the calendar. For example, Christmas, that was sort of like Father Frost. They had to have something in there to keep the peasants and workers happy over the winter solstice, but nothing religious, of course. And of course, religion was persecuted because, see, the mind of the new Soviet man can't be cluttered with religion, which of course Marx said that the opiate of the people. But now we say opium is the religious of the modern society, modern people. So the complete overturn. They tried. I mean, they couldn't completely, but a complete overturn as much as they could of everything: a culture, economics, just life itself was going to be changed. It was an experiment, a wonderful experiment. And well, look at all the troubles we had here: capitalism exploiting people and going to wars with other people. It was a much better system. Yeah, it cost about 100 million people in the end. Okay, maybe we should look at that now, the difference between Hitler's murders and Stalin's murders. A French, fairly impartial group has figured out over the years, from 1917 to the fall of the wall, the communists are responsible for the death of about 100 million people. Experiment. It didn't work out, but hey, nothing's perfect. And now Hitler, I think, we say, well, 6 million Jews, of course. But in addition to that, you'd have numbers of people who died, who weren't Jewish, who died for one reason or another, being against the Nazis. So the Nazi death toll is considerably less than the con, but then they're in power less. The Nazis are in for what is it? Do the math, from 1917 to 1989. Hitler 1933, 12 years, 1933 to 1945. But I'm sure if he had a long goal at it, he'd have been killing a lot. Although actually, the certain racial groups, they figured in fear, well, they have to die. We can't have them. But in the East, for example, like the Slavs, they were felt they were inferior, but we put them to work. Okay. In fact, they figured we take the land that they didn't have anyway from the communists, but we'll take them off the land, put them to work, and work for us. The real farming and everything would be done, or the running of the farms would be done by German veterans. They would be sent back into the East. There were these great ring roads and railroad circles that go all around there with settlements of German settlers taking over other people's lands. Okay, so not that, again, nobody owned land in Russia, but whatever, took over the holy soil of Mother Russia. So that was it. It's interesting, though, although they were way beyond, the communists were way beyond racism, were way beyond nationalism, yet they still had to appeal in the end to not Holy Mother, but Mother Russia. When the Nazis invaded Russia, and Stalin almost lost it. I mean, they got to the gates of Moscow, practically to the gates of Moscow, all right? And he really was a bungler. I'll talk about that later. But then he said, now we're going to rally our people. He couldn't rally them to communism. I'm going to die for communism. Caused me a lot of trouble. But you'll die for Mother Russia. And they did. 25 million of them. Well, 15 million military, another 10 million civilians. Can you imagine? Russia's population is somewhat larger than ours, but not by an awful lot. Imagine 25 million dead Americans from World War II. Okay, so the change, the communists didn't want to change art, want to change music, whereas the Nazis wanted the traditional. They, in many ways, and historians argue this, are they a party from the past because they're always going on about the Aryans of the past and all their art and everything. Hitler and favored and imposed old-fashioned type of art on Germany. Um, but on the other hand, they use all kinds of modern weapons and everything. Obviously, their blitzkrieg is hardly something from from the past. It's ultra modern. In fact, it caught the Allies flat-footed. So again, the historians still argue that whether Hitler or whether the Nazis were something from the early war or early age or today. Another interesting point, difference between Hitler and Stalin would be, I talked about their birth. Well, I mean they're coming to power. They also assassinations. Now this is a really surprising difference. They're recorded, we figure about, who can tell for sure attempted assassination, but that there were about 20 attempted assassinations of Hitler. Okay, and of course the famous one of July 20th, which was bloodily put down. With Stalin, they don't know of any authenticated attempted assassination. There was some story about when the Russians were evacuating, when the Russians right after them evacuated Moscow to Kubyshev, as they were packing up the limousines and everything. Somebody took a shot at him, but we don't know whether it happened. Well, I mean, here's like an absolute dictator of what was then 200 million people. A lot of them hated him, yet only one maybe attempt at assassination, or maybe just someone was kind of PO'd and took a shot at him. I don't know. Hitler having 20, that's quite a difference. The other differences between the two, well, in the birth, and that they shared. Both of them, Hitler and Stalin, had fathers who beat them. I mean, they really, of course, you got to look into the context of those days. I mean, it was kind of even biblically supported, parents beat your children. And so Stalin's father was a drunken brute, and he beat him, he beat the mother, and Stalin didn't have much use for him. He ran away from home. His mother, he was devoted to his mother. She got him into a seminary. Can you imagine Stalin in the seminary where he raised Cain, and eventually quickly left it? Hitler's father would beat him, but I don't think he was much of a drunkard. He would drink, but just a social drink sort of thing. Hitler's father was a cobbler. I mean, that's pretty low in those days on the economic totem scale. There's a difference there. Whereas I'm sorry, Stalin's father was a cobbler. Hitler's father was a clerk, not a clerk, a civil civil servant in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, non-existent Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he toiled away in that, just again a pen pusher, until he retired on a pension. And then retired to keep bees. I think he was a beekeeper, and died long before Hitler rose. And of course, another thing, both of them loved their mothers. Stalin loved his mother, and I think she lived right through that. She died in 1935, so she lived long enough to see Hitler become a tremendous dictator. Now, if she knew how bad he was, we don't know. But partly the story was when he saw her on her deathbed, she said to him, "You should have been a priest." Pray to God that he would have been. Whereas Hitler's mother she just mollycoddled him. I mean, when the father died, they lived on his dad's pension, and when Hitler went off to Vienna to become an artist, the great artist, turned down twice by the Vienna Academy. She would send him money to keep him going, but he got so low for a while there. He was in a workman's, like a municipal house for the unemployed. It's kind of a nice place, actually. I've read about it. They had showers and beds and all. It wasn't just a roach motel, but still, it was for people who are on their hard down on their luck. And Hitler made a living also, somewhat not too bad a living either, by painting postcards and the backs of seats that would like wooden chairs that would have some kind of decoration. He would paint mostly scenes on it. Well, Stalin had no artistic ability that we know of. Well, they have very strong artistic opinions. Oh, yes, socialist realism. We will show workers and peasants doing the work for the glorious Soviet motherland. And a lot of people got in trouble with that. But the one thing Stalin was not able to purge or warp to his wishes was the music and the classical music in the Soviet Union. The Russians are very keen on classical music, the land of Tchaikovsky and so on, Rimsky-Korsakov, and so these a director might let slip something like, I don't like this socialist realism or something, but he wouldn't be shot. He might be denounced in Pravda. He's a victim of bourgeois music. You see, what is bourgeois music? It's like the Nazis with their Jewish physics. Physics. Well, Einstein's a Jew, so physics is no good. Well, this is bourgeois music, but he wasn't. They weren't shot or anything. Shostakovich, for example, they died in bed. In fact, Shostakovich, I think, died on the same day Stalin died. But the symphony conductor, the Moscow Philharmonic, that sort of thing, the Bolshoi Ballet, had such uh, influence abroad, and they would travel abroad too. And then those who didn't, defect. Um, and so if these guys were shot, it would be too bad. But lesser ranks, I'm sure they were. So both of them meddled in art as well. For different aims. The Soviet was pretty much, well, in that realism, but in music, the classical, Hitler, a sort of a socialist realist, and always showing nude. They loved nude, showing nude and well proportioned nude males and females. And what they did early in the administration, they had all this decadent art around. Let's have an exhibit, see how horrible it is. And so they put it on, come see the decadent art. And they came in droves. The English, the Germans wanted to see it. So I think they put that down fairly soon. The exhibition of degenerate art. Of course, a lot of them are Jewish. They say, oh, that's Jewish art, you see, just like that's bourgeois art on the other side. It's just the ideology of not just the two of them, but of their followers. And remember, I think another difference we have to say is that Hitler, as I said, delivered the goods. He was popular until he started losing the war. After Stalingrad, then they started saying, oh, I don't know if we're going to win or not. They were living like kings early in the war, because once they conquered Poland for all the farm products there, France for all the wines and products, they were living well. I mean, I've seen pictures of German soldiers on leave with sacks of, of hams and cheeses and wine and what have you, looted from their conquered countries. But later on, of course, it's that they lost a lot of that land, and then they were. Stalin grabbed the one big turnover. The entire army, the Sixth Army, was not just surrendered or defeated, captured. Not a single person, not a single soldier got out of Stalingrad. So that really began to sober people up. And of course, from then it was all downhill. Well, on that, all downhill. On that note, I think it's time to end this interesting episode of Stan the History Man. Thank you for watching and listening. I look forward to having you come join me again. Thank you very much. Bye bye.